December 18, 1944, Leyte Gulf, the edge of survival. The air heavy with jungle heat, oil fumes, and the distant echo of artillery. American forces, battered and stretched thin, race against the clock to reinforce their captured airstrips before daylight. Among them, a lean Oklahoma farm boy, Kenneth Dutch Van Kirk, checks the battered skin of his P-47 Thunderbolt under a flickering lantern, the engine cowling smeared with grease and tropical dust. There's a tension in every movement. In Van Kirk's hands, every bolt and wire hums with the memory of a childhood spent fixing tractor engines against impossible odds. He's just 21, but his palms already bear the scars of improvisation. More mechanic than pilot, more survivor than soldier. The base commander paces behind him, barking orders. Japanese air raids have turned routine into roulette. Expect attack before dawn, all hands on deck. A dozen American planes dot the jungle tarmac, most grounded for lack of spare parts, their crews exhausted from 20-hour shifts and the stress that comes with radio-static forecasting death. Army tents sag under torrential rain. Mud swallows boots, uniforms mildew overnight. The airfield itself is a temporary miracle. Every bomb crater patched with volcanic ash and palm logs, every airstrip carved from dense foliage in a feat of desperate engineering. But the real threat isn't the mud or the climate, it's the enemy above. Japanese fighters, Mitsubishi Zeros and Nakajima Oscars own the night skies, their engines droning low and menacing, hunting for parked bombers, ammunition dumps, or wounded men crawling for cover. Allied command is painfully aware, every unit lost here cannot be replaced. Leyte must hold. American pilots review crude maps, memorize emergency landing strips, and sharpen the tools that keep aircraft flyable despite shortages. There is no margin for error. Van Kirk, for his part, works with a method born not of textbooks, but of necessity. His childhood was all outwitting nature, midnight repairs in the open field, salvaging scrap to keep plows running. In the Pacific, that same instinct translates seamlessly. Rewiring gun switches using scavenged copper, patching hydraulic lines with strips of torn parachute silk, sanding bullet holes smooth with the edge of a bare palm. His Thunderbolt is not regulation spec anymore. It's a field-modified survivor bolted together with half a factory's worth of borrowed parts and farm logic. When his squadron commander asks if it'll fly, Van Kirk just nods. A signal understood by men who know that war is less about certainty and more about guts. That night, the intelligence officer huddles ground crews together, reading from intercepted transmissions. The enemy is massing, 40 fighters detected, probable dawn attack. The plan? Stay hidden if possible, scramble a defense if needed, defend the airstrip to the last bolt of courage. No backup, no guarantee of air support. The only way out, the commander intones, is to fight. If you fall, Lady falls. If the airfield falls, half the Pacific falls with it. Across the flap tents, men cast nervous glances at the forest. Van Kirk, by contrast, scribbles notes for trick maneuvers, unorthodox spins, low-level ground loops, turbulence exploitation. His mind is a toolkit of the impossible. In the last hours before dawn, while others try to snatch sleep, Van Kirk crawls beneath his Thunderbolt's wing, tuning the control rods by feel alone. He thinks of wheat fields under Oklahoma stars, the night wind rustling against tin roofs, and the solitude of improvisation. The war has taught him one priceless lesson. In a crisis, the best plan is the one nobody expects. Tomorrow, that plan will be tested to its absolute limit. The hours pass in tense anticipation. The hum of generators, distant mortar booms, and the ever-present whine of mosquitoes fuse into a soundtrack of vulnerability. Every pilot knows that on jungle airstrips like this, salvation comes not from orders but ingenuity. Van Kirk can barely contain himself, running mental checklists not from army manuals but years of making do. His Thunderbolt is armored, yes, but it's the tricks he'll carry into battle that just might make the difference between survival and annihilation. As midnight tips toward dawn, the airfield falls eerily quiet. The rain slackens, the radios hiss soft static, and an uneasy calm settles where fear once raged. Men try to steady their hands, knowing the coming hours may rewrite their entire lives, or end them altogether. Van Kirk, seat-belted into his cockpit, watches the horizon, the phosphorescent glow of ocean storms etching the sky. 40 Japanese fighters are out there somewhere ready to descend. His impossible trick, the one honed over farm fields and engine blocks, waits in the dark. This is how wars are won, by men who refuse to wait for maybe, who wrest miracles from mud and metal and hope. Dawn approaches in a pale, uneasy haze. The jungle canopy rings with the distant rumble of engines. The American outpost at Leyte is still, too still, until dozens of Japanese Zeros and Oscars burst from the early morning clouds, engines shrieking as they dip toward the vulnerable Allied airstrip. For the ground crews, time suspends. 40 enemy aircraft glide in, their silhouettes sharp against the moist orange light, weapons ready to rip apart everything below. Van Kirk sits hunched in the cockpit of his patched-up Thunderbolt, the muddy field shivering beneath the weight of expectation. Years of farm labor have drilled into him a reflex for the desperate maneuver. With no time for formal tactics, he reaches deep into the well of impossible tricks born on Oklahoma's drought-scorched plains. His hands tighten on the stick. His heart pounds with the knowledge that everything now depends on instinct and invention. As the first bombs fall, Van Kirk throttles the engine and initiates the legendary dust loop, a ground-level spin that hurls sand, debris, and smoke into a dense cloud, obscuring the Thunderbolt momentarily and scrambling the sightlines of incoming attackers. Just as Japanese bullets begin to stitch the runway, Van Kirk's plane bursts from the haze, climbing steep and perpendicular, a metallic angel defying gravity and doctrine alike. What follows is a ballet of violence and mechanical genius. Van Kirk, alone, throws his aircraft through maneuvers unmapped by any instructor. He exploits the wind's turbulence off the jungle edge, dipping his powerful P-47 inches from the treetops before wheeling into vertical climbs that dare the Zero pilots to chase him. Some do, they never make it back. Van Kirk's armor plating shrugs off bursts that would cripple lighter fighters. He rolls, side slips, and executes a reverse throttle trick, cutting power to outpace a pursuer, then slamming the engine open to let the heavy radial torque snap the plane around, guns blazing. A dozen Japanese pilots die in the first minutes, taken by surprise as Van Kirk turns the incomprehensible into deadly fact. The ground crews watch stunned as his battered warbird dodges tracer rounds, spits flame, and splits enemy formation after formation. The local flora shudders as Zeros plunge and crash, their pilots outwitted by American improvisation, joined with agricultural precision, firing only at the lethal instant, conserving rounds, and landing every shot. Radio operators relay the news. Van Kirk has downed more than 10 in the opening wave. Japanese squadron leaders, desperate, order concentrated attacks. Van Kirk, anticipating the change, loops back to the airstrip, charging through the wreckage and banking hard, using the rising heat to launch into an improbable climb that puts him above the second wave. With his mechanical know-how, Van Kirk takes advantage of his plane's excess horsepower. The P-47 can climb where the Zeros stall. He rakes their wings with .50 caliber fire, counting bodies and burning fuselages as more enemy fighters spiral down. The battle intensifies. Japanese ground control radios bark frantic orders as Van Kirk, leaking oil and limping with broken ailerons, stays airborne, guiding his machine with the same unerring sense that saved farm equipment through tornadoes and dust storms. His keys are not military maxim, but innovation, exploiting the arching currents over the jungle, leveraging every pound of the Thunderbolt's mass, stretching every gallon of fuel to outlast, outfly, and outfight the enemy. By the end of the second wave, the battlefield is transformed. Van Kirk's improbable tricks, ground-level loops, torque rolls, engine stalls, camouflage bursts, have rewritten the tactical book. The Americans on the ground, once doomed, now surge with hope. The first count confirms 24 enemy aircraft destroyed, half the attacking force eliminated by one man's refusal to surrender to impossibility. Yet Van Kirk cannot rest. His Thunderbolt is battered. The cockpit rattles with stress. Over the radio, desperate voices shout coordinates. More enemy fighters approaching. Van Kirk grins, flashes a signal to the ground crew, and against every calculation, prepares his plane for another run. The battle is not over. The farm boy from Oklahoma, the one who once fought droughts and failing engines, now fights the greatest air armada the Pacific has yet seen. And he is winning. The air above Leyte transforms into a canvas of fire and desperation. Van Kirk's P-47, scarred and battered, climbs out of the dust cloud just as another wave of Japanese fighters slices in from the sun-drenched east. The enemy pilots, seasoned in the art of aerial ambush, expect the lone American to falter. But Van Kirk, leveraging both his rural resilience and battlefield experience, heads directly into the heart of chaos, trusting the improbable over standard procedure. He weaves between explosions and dying aircraft, using every bit of mechanical knowledge to keep the Thunderbolt together. With a snap roll, he peels behind a trio of Zeros, pivoting the heavy warbird with farm boy brute force. The trick is not just in technique. Van Kirk reads the terrain and the sky like a field map, anticipating every angle, every gust. When tracers zip by the canopy, he dives through a jungle clearing, the wingtips grazing palm fronds. On the climb out, he fires a precise burst, the 50 cals roaring, tearing through 2 enemy planes, sending a third spinning into the brush below. As Late's battered ground crews scramble to keep the runway clear, Van Kirk loops back overhead, radio crackling with frantic Allied voices. His engine coughs, systems flicker. But improvisation is second nature. He reroutes power from a failing battery to boost his gun circuits, a trick learned from midnight tractor repairs years before. In the cockpit, the tools of survival are not just military. They're the product of thousands of hours battling nature's adversity. The Japanese, struggling to adapt to his unpredictable style, switch tactics. They swarm in pairs, trying to box the Thunderbolt into kill zones. Van Kirk, sensing the trap, dips to ground level and kicks up a fresh cloud of mud, momentarily blinding his attackers. Blasting through, he fires at close range, the P-47's durability allowing risks that would doom lighter fighters. Each pass brings another wreck, each maneuver a study in technical improvisation. Adrenaline sharpens Van Kirk's senses. The battle's tempo rises with new threats. The enemy deploys bombers escorted by fresh fighters, intent on destroying the American airstrip for good. But Lady's defenders have found hope in Van Kirk's example. Ground anti-aircraft gunners provide covering fire as he plunges into another attack run, using every ounce of remaining fuel to climb above the formation. With a precision learned from crop dusting, careful, measured bursts, he picks off bombers one by one, forcing the Japanese to abort their runs. Technical resilience proves vital. The P-47, built for ruggedness, absorbs punishment that would split aircraft of lesser design. Van Kirk's repairs, field patches, jury rigs with parachute silk and wire, hold firm even under the stress of combat. Every bullet hole is a temporary setback, every system's failure a challenge. The Oklahoma farm mentality, adapt, repair, push forward, drives him as much as the roar of the engine. Midway through the battle, the numbers are staggering. 34 enemy planes confirmed destroyed, the majority by Van Kirk's own hands. Radio operators update command headquarters. Word spreads along the front lines. Even seasoned officers are stunned. A lone pilot, using nothing but mechanical wits and homegrown tactics, is changing the outcome of an entire campaign. On the ground, commanders rally their men around the Thunderbolt's furious ballet overhead. Fuel trucks race to supply Van Kirk. Medics treat the wounded in shattered tents, inspired anew. The Japanese, confronted by an adversary who defies all calculation, begin to withdraw, their formations in disarray, their morale crumbling. Van Kirk, nearly out of ammunition, faces the battle's final crescendo. Enemy survivors attempt a last desperate counterattack, grouping above the airfield. With one last roll of the dice, he loops his warbird, dives through their ranks, and rips off his last burst of gunfire. 2 more Zeros spiral down in flames, a testament to one man's refusal to play by the rules. At last, battered and exhausted, Van Kirk nurses his Thunderbolt back to the runway as the jungle falls silent. Allied airmen swarm the plane, counting bullet holes, celebrating victory, and marveling at a fighter that should have been shot down a dozen times over. Against all odds, 40 enemy aircraft are confirmed destroyed. Leyte is safe, and the legend of a farm boy's impossible trick begins its long journey through history. As silence falls over the battered Leyte airstrip, Van Kirk sits in his cockpit, shaken but resolute, staring at the expanse of wreckage that litters the runway and forests beyond. 40 enemy aircraft destroyed, an achievement so extraordinary it transcends the ordinary measures of victory. The ground crews, dazed and jubilant, swarm the battered Thunderbolt, touching the punctured fuselage as if to confirm that reality has not bent beyond recognition. For Van Kirk, the real burden will only begin after the engines cool and the adrenaline fades. The price of his impossible feat is written in oil leaks, missing ailerons, and scars that will fade only with time. Command officers crowd around, their voices layering orders, congratulations, and questions. Radio messages from distant headquarters crackle through the morning air, reporting the victory up the chain of command, triggering a wave of celebration miles behind the front line. But amid the jubilation, more insidious currents stir. Van Kirk's act of lone defiance becomes myth almost instantly. Newspapers back home carry headlines of the one-man maelstrom over late. Pentagon strategists request transcripts of his maneuvers, hoping to glean some secret for surviving the increasingly chaotic Pacific Air War. Army Air Force's training manuals begin to incorporate his ground loop dust trick and reverse throttle stall as emergency techniques for outnumbered flyers. In the weeks that follow, Van Kirk, still grounded while his aircraft undergoes repairs, fields interviews from intelligence officers and engineers. They dissect every move, every repair, how he rerouted failing electrical systems, patched oil leaks with silk, and extended the Thunderbolt's operational life with a mix of field logic and mechanical artistry. Battle reports from across the front trickle in, showing an uptick in unusual survival tactics among American squadrons. The Van Kirk Protocol, a rapidly compiled booklet of improvisational battlefield survival, finds its way to bases from Okinawa to Saipan. The broader legacy is profound. Morale soars. Young mechanics and pilots learn to trust their instincts, combining discipline with creativity. The myth grows with every retelling. Farm wisdom and tenacity applied to the most advanced machines of war, yielding the kind of results that planners in distant offices rarely anticipate. Base engineers begin to experiment with new materials for field repairs, canvas and parachute silk, woven together to plug hydraulic leaks, inspired by Van Kirk's nighttime heroics. Japanese planners, stunned by the defeat, adjust their own tactics. New protocols for avoiding improvised cloud cover, revised assault patterns for airfields defended with unusual maneuvers. The myth of the impossible trick crosses enemy lines, referenced in their debriefings and sometimes met with a grudging respect. But for Van Kirk, the impact is more intimate and complex. He struggles with the aftermath, fatigue, survivor's guilt, and the ever-present sense that nothing about war is truly fair or heroic, only necessary. Letters from home, filled with pride and anxiety, reach him in the hospital tent, where he spends days recovering and weeks reflecting. For all the glory, the lesson remains grounded in practical humility, invention in the face of destruction, an unwillingness to yield even when the books say surrender is inevitable. As the war draws on, Van Kirk's influence expands outside the Pacific. Disaster relief teams in the United States and abroad adapt techniques of rapid field improvisation, learning from Leyte's survivors. The migration of military innovation into civilian contexts accelerates. School engineers and agricultural experts install quick-fix repairs on machinery, echoing lessons learned from the cockpit of a battered Thunderbolt. Decades later, historians will trace a line from Van Kirk's struggle over late to broader changes in military culture, from rigid adherence to doctrine to a renewed embrace of adaptability, field engineering, and the active encouragement of creative, desperate solutions. Technical colleges reference his tactics in courses on battlefield innovation. Museums display relics from the Leyte battle, patched-up aircraft skins, homemade tools, and grainy photographs of the impossible morning. In the final measure, Van Kirk's story endures not because he destroyed 40 planes single-handedly, but because he revealed what comes next when possibility fails. What remains, always, is invention. The story moves from war zones to peacetime, from dogfights to crop fields, from battle manuals to civilian handbooks. Every future engineer, mechanic, or pilot who trusts intuition as much as training owes something to a farm boy who refused to let reality define victory. And so, as the sun sets over a peaceful Leyte, now quiet except for the whispers of memory, Van Kirk's legacy lives on, proof that when faced with impossible odds, the strongest weapon remains the ability to invent, adapt, and persist.